play it any louder, then it's getting shut down.
My name's Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. Today is October 25th, 2025. It is 9:49 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Here are the top U.S. news highlights from the past 24 hours. Historic preservation and process lawsuits after White House East Wing demolition. Heavy demolition equipment completed a large-scale teardown of White House East Wing this week as Trump moves forward with a privately funded $250 to $300 million ballroom project. Preservation groups and a Virginia couple have already filed motions seeking to halt construction, arguing required public review and historic preservation processes were bypassed. This raises legal questions about permitting, review authority, and executive power over national heritage sites. Judge rulings constraining administration grant conditionality remain in force. Federal judges have found the administration's FEMA conditional aid letters violated prior orders. Those rulings continue to constrain how the administration can attach immigration enforcement conditions to disaster relief. Expect more litigation motions while agencies attempt to rework guidance. Arizona sues to force swearing in of new House member. The state filed suit to compel the House to seat a newly elected Democrat, a constitutional representation dispute that remains active and could affect House arithmetic and committee processes. Court battles over domestic guard and troop deployments continue. The administration's efforts to deploy federal forces or the National Guard in places such as Chicago and Portland remain blocked in multiple courts. Appeals and emergency filings continue. There is no confirmed nationwide large-scale active deployment of U.S. military forces against U.S. citizens in the last 24 hours, but legal fights and requests for emergency relief are active and could produce sudden developments. Chicago immigration enforcement operations and local detentions drew pushback. High-visibility immigration operations in Chicago and related scenes of detentions have prompted local officials' protests, and civil liberties scrutiny, oversight, and potential litigation are in motion. Offshore U.S. strikes, Caribbean, continue to produce local and diplomatic fallout. U.S. maritime strikes near Venezuela that killed and detained suspects have generated UN complaints, calls for legal memos, and congressional briefings. Rights groups continue to press for investigations into use of force authority. White House demolition and funding approach create oversight and precedent risks. Beyond historic preservation concerns, critics say the timing during a federal shutdown and private funding narrative, plus reported corporate donor involvement, concentrate institutional power and raise governance questions about access, influence, and precedent for changes to federal property. Lawsuits filed will test administrative and review processes. $11 billion infrastructure freeze and shutdown effects persist. The administration's freezes on Army Corps and other obligations continue to delay local flood control, transit, and construction projects. Those delays have direct public safety and economic effects in affected communities. Courts and funding decisions will determine which projects resume. Pentagon internal communications tightening governance implication. A reported Pentagon memo restricting staff contacts with Congress raises transparency concerns at a moment when oversight of overseas actions and domestic deployments is heightened. Permitting and contracts and federal services delayed by shutdown. Permitting pauses, delayed contract awards, and paused federal project funding are squeezing contractors, slowing construction starts, and threatening timelines for water, transit, and levee projects. Localities and small contractors face near-term cash flow and scheduling strains. Aviation and travel vulnerability, unpaid safety staff risk. Reports warn tens of thousands of air safety and security workers are working without pay, increasing risk of staffing gaps or travel disruption if the shutdown persists through peak travel periods. This is a near-term consumer service risk. Trade and tariff rhetoric continues to inject price and supply uncertainty. Ongoing tariff threats and export control posturing, China, India, Colombia discussions keep pressure on freight, agricultural commodity flows, and some manufacturing inputs. A medium-term inflationary and supply chain risk. CDC staffing disruption remains an operational vulnerability. Large IIF layoff notices at the CDC, hundreds to 1,000 affected, with some rescinded, have degraded staffing and surveillance capacity. While no new nationwide outbreak has been reported in the last 24 hours, public health officials warn reduced capacity could slow detection and response if an event occurs. Diplomatic backlash from White House demolition, strikes, and tariffs. The East Wing demolition has drawn international attention. At the same time, U.S. maritime strikes near Venezuela, expanding tariff threats, and high-level trade diplomacy with China, Malaysia talks are producing diplomatic friction and multilateral concerns. Expect continued UN and partner state scrutiny. Historic preservation permit motion filed to stop East Wing demolition filed the 24th to 25th. Plaintiffs allege required review processes were skipped. Courts will decide whether to halt work pending procedural review. Solar for All and grant rescission suits remain active. Harris County and coalition suits are seeking injunctions to restore canceled clean energy grants. Those motions could decide whether affected projects proceed. Court decisions and emergency appeals over guard deployments continue to generate filings. Expect immediate courtroom activity and possible emergency orders in the next 24 to 72 hours. Complete demolition of the White House East Wing to build a private-funded ballroom, which I'm really having a hard time believing that this is actually privately funded, considering how much money is going missing from our federal agencies, from our governmental body, and the amount of secrecy surrounding this administration. Satellite and on-the-ground photos show large sections of the East Wing leveled. The move has been called unprecedented by historians and has triggered immediate legal actions and bipartisan outrage. UN human rights experts publicly condemn U.S. maritime strikes near Venezuela as possible extrajudicial executions. This international condemnation has elevated diplomatic and oversight stakes for the administration. AI-generated video reposted by the president depicting him as a crowned pilot dropping feces on No Kings protesters. Reported major outlets and commenters described the post as grotesque, demeaning. Entertainment figures protested unauthorized use of music in the clip. The reposting and amplification of such AI imagery by the president has prompted bipartisan criticism and contributed to escalated protest mobilization. This is a verified recent action that many outlets cataloged as inappropriate and potentially inflammatory. I think it's a clear indicator of dementia. If Donald Trump's out here having fantasies about slinging shit everywhere and this is a man that shits his pants, I just think there's something weird going on. Some sort of bizarre psychological fascination with the crap that's in his fucking diaper. I think it's a sign of dementia. That's just my personal opinion. No newly published verified allegations of fresh sexual misconduct claims against anybody in the administration. Legal containment is the dominant dynamic. Courts are actively policing deployments, conditional funding, and now historic preservation and permit procedure. Many outcomes will be decided by injunctions and emergency appeals in the next 72 hours. Operational risks to citizens are immediate and concrete. Infrastructure freezes, project delays, permit backlogs, and degraded CDC capacity translate to near-term service and safety impacts in affected localities. Shock optics amplify political risk. The East Wing demolition and the president's amplification of inflammatory AI content will keep protests, oversight, demands, and diplomatic scrutiny at high levels. Pentagon tightens control on staff communications with Congress on October 15th. An internal memo now requires Pentagon staff to route or clear contacts with lawmakers through legislative affairs, a transparency and oversight risk while military and domestic deployment issues are under intense scrutiny. About 60,000 aviation safety workers, controllers at the TSA, controllers and TSA remain unpaid as shutdown drags on. Sustained unpaid staffing raises the risk of flight delays, cancellations, and degraded. Sustained unpaid staffing raises the risk of flight delays, cancellations, and degraded aviation and safety and service during peak travel periods. And these people, 60,000, there's 60,000 workers right there that are going to be financially hard up because of Donald Trump and what his administration is doing. And this government is talking about removing people's access to food assistance in the month of November. And here's 60,000 workers that are not getting paid and working for free as a result of the Trump administration's actions. I just needed to clearly point that out because I got a bunch of MAGAs that I don't even know if they're real people in my comments trying to make up a fuss over the stuff going on with SNAP, and is absolutely inappropriate. There's a reason why we have these programs. The White House East Wing demolition sparks immediate preservation lawsuits. Crews have reduced large parts of the East Wing to rubble as a privately funded ballroom project proceeds. Plaintiffs filed motions to halt work, alleging bypassed historic review and permitting processes. This is an unprecedented institutional and legal flashpoint. Yeah, you know, I've seen a video of an old lady that was like, they're not there to dance. What the fuck do you need a ballroom for? You're not there to dance and throw parties. You're supposed to be governing. A president serves in office for a 4-year term. The fuck do you need a ballroom for? You should be working. If you have no intention of working and doing presidential things, why the fuck did you run for president? Excuse my language. Top Trump official accused of defying court order on use of tear gas during Chicago enforcement actions. Allegations that federal actors ignored court limits on crowd control tools in a domestic operation raise both legal exposure and civil rights risk for the administration. Legal battles intensify over National Guard and federal deployments to U.S. cities. Multiple federal and state court filings are seeking to block or authorize Guard and federal forces in cities, Portland, Chicago, etc. Emergency appeals could produce same-day high-impact judicial orders. Pentagon's memo centralizes Congress communications via legislative affairs. Independent reporting corroborates the internal Pentagon clampdown and notes implications for senior officials' ability to respond directly to congressional oversight requests. FAA transport signals that staffing gaps are already causing flight delays and could worsen. Concrete travel sector disruption is already visible. Thousands of delays as contractor and TSA staffing and morale degrade, a consumer and logistics vulnerability while the shutdown continues. Arizona sued the U.S. House to force the swearing in of Representative-elect Alita Grijalva, a constitutional representation fight that could change House arithmetic and immediate committee dynamics. This escalates partisan legal tactics tied to the shutdown. There was a train derailment in Kent County, Virginia, that just happened. A coal train operated by CSX derailed in New Kent County between Roxbury Road and South Mountcastle Road on or about Saturday, October 25th in the afternoon around 3:10 p.m. At least 15 cars carrying coal plus 2 locomotives went off the track into adjacent wetlands. No injuries reported. The derailment did cause spill and discharge of coal into the wetlands. Rail traffic, including Amtrak service between Newport News and Richmond, was impacted and delayed by diverted routing. The cause of the derailment is not known from publicly reported sources at this time. It says cause unknown in official reports. The spill into the wetlands, cleanup and investigation are presumably underway. Although it appears to be a freight derailment without hazardous materials mentioned, it's significant due to the number of cars and locomotives off track and spill into a sensitive wetland area. In February 2023, for comparison, there was a train derailment. Chemicals spread across multiple states. It was East Palestine, Ohio. Lower Saucon, Saucon Township, Pennsylvania, March 2nd, 2024. A Norfolk Southern Corporation train derailed, spilling diesel fuel and polypropylene plastic pellets into the Lehigh River. No injuries, but environmental and corporate governance implications. Pretty sure that that's the one that I think that might be associated with acts of terrorism with Donald Trump. Train derailments is something that I'm trying to keep an eye on. Other than that, other information about train derailments, according to the Association of American Railroads, AAR, for all of 2024, there were 793 Class 1 railroad train derailments in the U.S., with about 74% occurring in rail yards and 26% on mainline tracks. Derailments are very common in the U.S. freight rail industry, according to U.S.A. Facts. As of October 2023, the FRA had recorded 742 derailments in 2023 up to that date. Major freight rail associations report that although overall derailment rates have improved significantly since 2005, public reporting of major derailments, especially those involving hazardous materials, is available. But many smaller derailments are not heavily covered in the media. A complete list of derailments for the last 2 years with full cause, location, track type injuries may have etc. I asked for a list and it's not giving me a coherent sentence. The FRA safety data portal may have queryable data, but media summaries do not give a consolidated list. So the FRA safety data portal, for the New Kent derailment, this specific cause not yet reported. Hazardous materials unlikely, but possible. It needs to be investigated. And here are the top trade and economic highlights for the past 24 hours. U.S.-China trade talks underway in Malaysia as both sides seek to avoid escalation. Senior U.S. officials met with Chinese counterparts in Kuala Lumpur, describing the first day of negotiations as very constructive. The agenda includes rare earth export restrictions and export control weaponization. President Trump announced a 10% tariff increase on Canadian imports. The hike follows a Canadian provincial ad run during the World Series that Trump deemed fraudulent. Canada stated it is ready to resume talks. U.S. launched an investigation into China's compliance with the 2020 trade deal. The Office of U.S. Trade Representative said it will probe whether China fulfilled obligations under the Phase 1 agreement, raising risk of new tariffs or retaliatory actions. U.S. businesses' activity picked up in October, but business sentiment worsened. The S&P Global Flash PMI rose 54.8, indicating growth, yet companies cited policy uncertainty, notably tariffs, as hurting confidence in keeping manufacturing and export growth cautious. U.S. firms are seeing a sharp divide between low-income and affluent consumer spending. Corporations noted that while affluent households continue to spend, lower-income consumers are delaying purchases, with tariffs and uncertainty compounding pressures on vulnerable households. Farm sector debt is reaching record levels amid weak export demand, with China buying no U.S. soybeans this year. Corn harvests are up, but prices are down, pushing many U.S. farmers deeper into debt as global grain flows shift. And remember, kids, the stock market is not the economy. Just because the S&P 500 or Dow Jones might be performing does not mean that wages are growing, jobs are secure, inflation is under control, or that people are thriving. And here is the upcoming hazardous weather outlook for the next few days. Northeast and Great Lakes, no widespread severe weather alerts currently showing in official bulletins. Local offices are noting cooler overnight temperatures and early morning frost potential in some northern New England and interior Great Lakes zones. While no major storm is flagged, residents along lakeshore should monitor for gusty winds and small craft advisories, giving changing temperature gradients. Southeast dry conditions and elevated winds continue across parts of Georgia and the Carolinas. Fire weather risk is elevated. Low humidity plus gusty winds could support quicker fire spread in grassy wooded areas. No major severe storm watches currently in place, but the situation remains unstable for fire concerns through midweek. Central and southern plains and Midwest and the Texas Panhandle and adjacent regions, a low chance of isolated severe thunderstorms is being reported for Thursday, with hail up to 1.5 inches and wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour possible. Flash flood potential 5 to 15% is flagged for parts of the eastern panhandle Friday into early Saturday. For broader Midwest, conditions are stable to date. And here are the top international news highlights for the past 24 hours. Canada stands ready to resume trade talks with the U.S. after they were abruptly halted. Mark Carney, Canada's Prime Minister, announced on October 24th that Ottawa is willing to restart talks with the U.S. even though Donald Trump escalated tensions by ending negotiations over an Ontario provincial ad using former President Ronald Reagan. Global equity funds register their biggest weekly inflow in 3 weeks as U.S.-China trade sentiment improves. Investors poured about $11 billion into global equity funds in the week through October 22nd, driven by hopes for progress in U.S.-China trade talks and strong U.S. earnings. The U.S. signals additional sanctions on Russia unless Moscow ends the war in Ukraine. The Trump administration is preparing new measures targeting Russian banks and oil infrastructure, with pressure on Europe to join in the next phase of sanctions. India insists it will not rush into trade deals with restrictive conditions, even as one with the U.S. appears near. Trade Minister Piyush Goyal stated on October 24th that New Delhi won't accept conditions limiting its trading autonomy, despite the U.S. pushing for a very near deal. Japan's new Prime Minister Sanae Takaishi faces early tests of her defense and security agenda ahead of meeting with Trump. Sworn in October 24th, her conservative agenda, heavy on defense spending and Japan first style, gives the U.S. more leverage, but her minority government raises doubts about execution. The U.S. warns of further flight delays amid the government shutdown. Air traffic controllers will soon miss paychecks. With the shutdown entering its 24th day, about 13,000 air traffic controllers and 50,000 TSA officers are working without pay, and the Transportation Secretary expects more travel disruptions. I'm a little bit taken aback to see that the Japanese are doing Japan first and increases on defense spending. I think that's very strange, especially considering that if that's the case, then this woman is likely colluding with a white supremacist. Why would Japan participate? I don't know. I don't know what the hell's going on. But it's all fucked up, okay? Apparently we cuss over here. I've seen clips of Canada telling America to piss off, and statements were made about not doing trade with the United States anymore. I'm pretty sure that's what I seen today. So I'm a little confused. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that the old relationship the country had with the U.S., built on deep economic integration and security ties, is now over. He said Canada's heavy reliance on the U.S. as a trade partner has become a vulnerability. Excuse me. In that context, Carney set a goal for Canada to double its non-U.S. exports within the next decade, signaling a deliberate pivot toward markets such as India and China, and a drive to reduce exposure to one trading partner. The Canadian government also formally announced strong retaliatory tariffs measures in response to U.S. trade actions. For example, a 25% tariff on a broad set of U.S. goods, with the Canadian dollar, $155 billion of Canadian currency as of February 2025. The U.S., under its current administration, has imposed tariffs and trade actions on Canada, particularly in sectors such as steel, aluminum, autos, and lumber. Canada views these as threats to its industries and jobs. The economic reliance of Canada on the U.S., over 75% of Canada's exports go to the U.S., means that U.S. trade policy shifts create outsized risk for Canadian employment, investment, and growth. Carney cited this as a driver of the pivot. Canada is arguing that with U.S. trade policy becoming more transactional and less reliable, in Canada's view, it must diversify to protect its economic sovereignty. Canada is not saying that it will completely stop trade with the U.S. The two countries remain deeply integrated. What is happening is a strategic shift in priority and rhetoric. For example, Carney's government announced it will lift retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods that comply with United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, starting September 1st, 2025, showing nuance. The trade relationship is under review. Canada is seeking to renegotiate or reframe its trade and security partnership with the U.S., not sever ties. For Canada, this pivot could mean more investment in export markets beyond the U.S., different supply chain alignments, and greater emphasis on Canadian domestic industries. For U.S., because Canada's largest export market for many U.S. states and key supplier of oil and gas and minerals to the U.S., any meaningful Canadian diversification could reduce some U.S. export advantage, raising prices for U.S. buyers and complicate supply chains. Trade negotiations ahead of the relationship is likely to feature harder-line Canadian negotiating positions. Canada is signaling that future trade and security deals with the U.S. must respect Canadian sovereignty and avoid dependency. Strategic sectors, Canada's pivot may drive more activity in critical minerals, energy, and non-U.S. export markets. The U.S. will need to consider how to maintain access to Canadian inputs and manage its stateside export risks. Is there anybody that Trump is not pissing off right now? Is the Trump administration deliberately trying to destroy the United States economy? That is the question. Because that's certainly what it looks like. This concludes our news report for today. I'm going to go now. I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there.
So the Olympics is great. And Johnny, for the others, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in on the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny. And we got the World Cup, too. And, it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. I got both of them. I got the Olympics, and I got the World Cup. And I said, it's too bad. One was in 2026, and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election, and now we won, so I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So, Johnny, thank you for the World Cup, and everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey, guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment to my videos. And also, Don't forget to check out my shop where you could get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, cause MAGA's fucking cockroaches. And fuck MAGA, abolish MAGA, fuck you MAGA.